Okay, rule number 2, play, fame, and humor, and this is what we don't do enough, is saying, you know, I mean, because a lot of creativity and innovation are serious business. They're going to make a lot of money for us, or we're working hard to get our company going, and we forget that the mind has to be relaxed to be its most creative. And so the play, frame of humor, and I started, and I have the words director of mirth is a concept that's been, what do you call it when you put that little signal on it? Trademarked, yeah. And we started that with Apple Computer. John Sculley was the CEO, and so we went and took all their top people through and they really fell in love with the director of mirth. How do we keep humor, joy, and fun and new ideas coming out of Apple Computer all the time? So the director of mirth, and the story that I got this from was in the Middle Ages, of course, not only every king and kingdom had their fool, their court jester, but anyone that had a lot of money. It's like having a Mercedes, you had your court jester. Oh, well, not going to go over to the Smiths tonight. Their court jester is way below what we think it should be, you know. And so one day the court jester goes too far. He's the only person in the kingdom allowed to make fun of the king. And he goes too far and he makes fun of his family, and the king stands up and says, I want this guy dead. You went too far. And so the guards start carrying him out, and the nobility comes up and says, hey, this 40-year guy, he's been the best fool you've ever had for 40 years. And the king says, okay, so that I will go along with that. He said, but I'm a divine right king. What I say is God's word. I can't go back on it. However, since he has been such a good fool, I'll allow him to choose the way he wants to die. And the fool bows and says, sire, if it's all the same to you, I'd like to die of old age. Now, that was the story that but you see what's interesting is, look at his job description. The fool's job description is to turn pain into pleasure, sorrow into joy. That's what he does every day. He's supposed to be the wit that can talk a king out of making a stupid decision by playing with the decision and getting the wits going and both sides of the brain going. And so the fool, and my favorite is the fool in King Lear in Shakespeare. And he takes one of the guys, the Earl of Kent, up a mountain. Kent wants to commit suicide. So the fool takes him up a little bit of a mountain, and as the fool takes him up, the fool's squatting down so that Kent thinks he's going up high, and then he makes this great statement, and then he jumps, and he lands about 2 inches later. And of course, it's like in Zen, the master hits you with a stick sometimes, because you can't get it any other way. And so he shakes into reality. And you know, so the fool, now, we at Apple Computer, they had a director of mirth every month at Cupertino. And this director of mirth, whether it was a male or female, had an assistant. The director of mirth would be almost like a month off to do the most fun things that could happen in any way he or she could do it. And the assistant helped, and then the next month the assistant would be the director of mirth with a new assistant, and that's how they passed it on. And so their reward was they had 2 dinners and wine at any of the really good restaurants in and around Silicon Valley. And so it was a very interesting thing. Some of the stuff they did was pretty unbelievable, but the whole idea is to set the environment. We took it to Cox Enterprises, that's another of my big clients, and they're out of Atlanta, of course. In Spokane, one of their guys had 17 people. He ran Spokane. And I asked all these guys at Cox, these were the guys that ran all the Cox systems around the world, wherever they were. Newspapers, auto auctions, and all this. And I said, how many of you have ever called a creativity meeting? 0. We have meetings for numbers, we have meetings for new products, but we never have a creativity meeting. And you know, so what this guy did was he got into it and he hired me to go up there. And he said, now I want my 17 people, there was about 4 women, 13, 14 men. And he said, how do we do this? And I said, well, let's set up the environment. Well, typically of a boardroom, they have a long, big table that's no good for anything but making people freeze up. You know, you sit there with your pen. So got rid of all furniture, brought in fit balls, and brought in a row of thing of Hawaiian shirts. And so everyone came in and they're looking around, their furniture's gone. And because we're, you know, going to move them around and do all sorts of stuff. And so I said, what do we do? And Barry said, go over there and get a Hawaiian shirt and then come back and sit on your balls and we'll get this meeting going. So you cannot sit on a ball without kind of moving around. I mean, you can't be seriously taking notes and discussing the Wall Street Journal while you're sitting on a ball. And so immediately the environment says, this is new and different. We had this in the biggest printer in Atlanta who had huge, and printers, I mean, it's when you get on the press and the absolute, how fast you can get in and off the press and all this. And so all the press people ended up with fit balls because they're under such, and all the time. And when you sit on a fit ball, by the way, you straighten up. Right now we're becoming leaning Americans because we're all here. And of course, yoga does just the opposite. It opens your chest. And of course, when you open your chest, you breathe differently, you behave differently. So to do yoga or Pilates is almost now a necessity to me, especially for males who are walking around like, man, you know, this is the new manly man in America. There's one of the greatest cartoons is they have an ape. It's evolution. The ape starts to stand up. And then they have one where the bowman, of course, bow and arrow, you're standing straight up. And then back down to the guy at the computer is about the same as the ape. You know, it's kind of devolving. And so, you know, Hawaiian shirts, exercise balls, and I like rods. Another one I do is I'd have all this stuff if I were running an exercise. And you take a straight rod and pull it back over your shoulders and hold it and do some light knee bends and bring it back over. After about 2 minutes of this, you feel your whole, everything's changed. Positive mood is so important, and this is the way to get it. So that's rule 2, is how do you create a play frame? I love this cartoon. I'm thinking doing Pamela. I'd like to, this is what I call mirthful humor. And one more aside, sarcastic and cynical humor. Cynical from the Greek, meaning dog-like. Sarcastic from the Greek, sarcophagus, means eating flesh. Sarcastic humor eats the flesh of the corporate culture. It does it. I've worked with NBA teams where the sarcasm, one guy, 6'10" center, 6'10" was big 15 years ago, couldn't move to his left. And so they started making fun of him. And of course, the more they made fun, the worse it got. And so the first thing we said was, let's change our brand of humor for this whole team and start that way. So sarcasm and cynicism, and occasional sarcastic jokes are great, but as Freud said, humor takes what bothers you, circulates it through, and brings it out in a socially acceptable form. So I'm really pissed at my wife from this morning. I'll come in and I'll aim my being upset at you in the form of a sarcastic joke. And you're saying to yourself, where'd that come from? And so that's how it works when we begin to think about that. So state of fun. How do you get to the state of fun? The ability to laugh easily and often. You don't have to be a comedian. You just have to be ready to laugh. Kids are ready to laugh. Australians as a culture, from my dealings, are the most ready to laugh of any culture. Canadians 2, Americans 3. The Japanese have the weirdest laughter. And they don't like to laugh at business. They like to go and drink American scotch and laugh after work. And it's more like giddiness. It's really interesting to see different cultures. And the English love the droll kind of sense of humor. Nourish your own sense of humor. How do you become more funny? You are in the business of being creative. One of the things you can do every day is say, how do I become more fun, more easy to laugh? How do I begin to look for fun things to happen? Build fun into meetings and presentations. We all tend to be, even if we're right brain, we build left brain content. We say, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this is how it'll go. Oh, it'll be exactly 45 minutes, perfect. And then the fool, if you had one, your director of mirth would be saying, where's the fun? This is the most boring meeting I'm ever going to have to participate in. How do we make it fun? And it doesn't have to be laugh out loud, ha-ha, depending on who's coming. But it's something that brings in the excitement, because if their emotions are so key, 20 laughs a day. If you don't get them done, you realize you're going to bed, you've only done 13 laughs. You've got to turn on Bill Maher or Jon Stewart or somebody and laugh your 20 laughs. I mean, that's one specific. Greens love this. Well, that's a guideline I can follow, you know. No sarcastic or cynic. It's not getting the point of the joke. It's getting the point of joking.
It's great when you go to a news show to get your humor.
Yeah, it is. It is fun. Finally, right?
I miss George W. Bush for that.
Yeah. Well, they've got others. So that's rule number 2. Now, after we do rule number 3, I'm going to ask you, this is a little bit of like speed dating. This is like speed creativity, which is kind of an anachronism, but so are 12 rules. There can be no rules of creativity. There's touches and pieces and hints and ideas and suggestions. I'm going to, after each 3 rules, I'm going to ask you to say, now what of these 3 rules can I pull in for me to be more creative personally and in my business? And I think there's no line anymore. I mean, you can't say, I don't want to be creative personally, I just want to be creative to get this deal done. No, you've got to become creative. And so what can you do to do this? So this is one of my favorites too, because I happen to be a lover of champagne. All new discoveries and insights come because of a breakdown. That's not exactly true, but it's pretty close. I mean, you can have a just wild, out-of-the-blue thought and say, I think this could be a business. But usually, something breaks down. There is a pain. And you see that pain, and nobody else has seen it, and you're going to solve it. And so that's why breakdown is breakthrough. We love breakdowns. We love them. As a matter of fact, when we're learning to get over fear, one of the things we can do is take a day and pile up 20 rejections. I mean, to say our goal for today is get rejected 20 times. And there's a great book called Dance of Fear by a psychologist, Harriet Lerner, where she's helping a guy that she'd helped through his divorce, and he hadn't had a date in 2 years. So she sends him to Starbucks at the Hallmark Bar in Kansas City and says, go in, pile up 75 rejections in women that you ask to have a cup of coffee with you. And here's your, hello, my name is Rod. I hope you don't think I'm rude, but would you have a cup of coffee? He said, that's it. Then you stand and look at them until they answer you. No more talking, no more nothing. That's your script. And so he says, yeah, I'll do that. So he goes in, 7 straight rejections. And only took him 35, 40 minutes. And then he gets accepted 3 straight times. Took him an hour and a half. Acceptances were getting in the way of his day's goal, to pile up the rejections. And of course, what she'd done is, her theory is, none of us have danced with rejection. We haven't gone through it enough. And you, with ideas and companies, need to get rejected until it just goes off the side of your, it doesn't matter. And people don't even feel bad rejected. Sometimes I'm saying, I don't even want to get into it with this guy because I'm afraid I'll hurt his feelings. See, if you cast the emotions out there that you're going to hurt me if you don't take it, then you've already sent the first don't take my idea seriously message. Do you see what I'm saying? It's got to be, hey, I got something great. If you like it, great, we'll match. If you don't, hey, see you tomorrow. Then all of a sudden you've taken the guy off the hook who's going to listen to you. Does that make sense to you? It's very important to do this, because there's nothing worse than saying, honey, I don't even want to go over and say hello. He'll be asking me again about the, that's what you can't have happen. It's
But that's a lot of coffee.
That's a lot of coffee? Yeah, it is. But he was talking too fast by about the 50th rejection. Yeah.
Is there a book that you particularly really love, and is it a guide or something on people that do run in fear a lot, questioning themselves, as entrepreneurs?
Buy that book, Dance of Fear. That's the best. Best I've seen. She nails it. Harriet Lerner, PhD.
Harriet what?
Lerner, L-E-A-R-N-E-R. I was so taken with that book because I thought she's the first that's really nailed it. And in this book, we talk about fear and tanking. And tanking is the worst. Tanking means I stop trying before I get to the fear stage. So you have an idea and you say to yourself, they're not going to buy off on it. Well, that protects you from even going and asking and getting rejected. Do you see what I'm saying? So tanking, and athletes, you know, you get these signals and symbols. You know, if this guy's going to the plate and you need a run, it's the last of the ninth, you know this guy's not going to make it. He's a great player and all this, but he chokes at the point of most importance. And you see that in golf all the time. And my background, by the way, was working with athletes as the beginning, and that's where Catch Fire and my first book, Mentally Tough, came from. How do you get mentally tough? Dom Perignon, in France in 1688, he came up with the idea of champagne. Now there's a really rigidly truthful story, and there's then what I like, which is the kind of the myth about Dom Perignon. And this is the more fun part. But champagne at that time was still white wine. There was no bubbles. But France is, this part of Paris is here. You go north about 50 miles and up into Champagne, Épernay and Rheims, Reims, they say. And that's the triangle where Chardonnay and Cabernet grapes are grown. Chardonnay and Pinot Noir grapes are grown. And so they make this still white wine. They call it Vin Gris, G-R-I-S. So it means gray because they mix the grapes and it came out a little gray, but it was very good. So one day, because they're so northerly, they finish the bottles, and then there was no cork. They put wood with hemp in the bottle as the stopper, put them in the northerly caves, which had been, by the way, the chalk caves had been made by Caesar in terms of getting a lot of chalk for some stuff he was building. So they had the chalk caves. So it froze because we had an early winter. And so when it freezes, alcohol and CO2 is not fully fermented. Yeast working with sugar creates alcohol and CO2. So all of a sudden, you had this buildup of alcohol and CO2, all the bottles burst. Because you remember, still wine, and if you've never noticed it, champagne bottles are heavy. Regular bottles are much lighter. Why? They have to withstand 108 ounce per square inch pressure. 108 pounds per square inch of pressure on a champagne bottle. So they didn't know there was such thing. So all the monklets come racing into Dom Perignon. They say, hey, all the bottles have burst. And Dom Perignon was blind. And he was a scientist. And he was the treasurer. He was responsible for Auvillard, the entire Benedictine monastery. So he says, go out, find if there's any bottle that haven't burst. So they bring him a number of bottles that hadn't burst. And he takes this hemp piece of wood out of it and bursts, and he pours it in. He says, I think I'm drinking stars. Now, it's kind of the way it happened. But it is the most romantic and fun way to describe it. And it gets you the point. But if you were engineers at Caltech, I would say, but that's the myth part of it, and here's the reality. I'm not going to even give you the reality, but it's very close to that. He did invent champagne that way, and but even more important, he said, so how do we make this accident permanent? And so it's like you as entrepreneurs are looking for a breakdown that you turn into the breakthrough. And that's really the key. And when you get this in your brain and start thinking this way day after day after day, that's really key. So as I said in the first part of it, Nasiro Yakamatsu, probably the most creative person that ever lived. And he has right now 3,000 patents. I can't remember where I had that, but it's the persistent and systematic search for change is creativity. And so you have to have somehow, the left brain and the right brain, the systematic comes, I will every day make sure that in my calendar I've done something creative. I've actually, and maybe I'm doing a lot of things, but I want to do one thing that's I persistently pull together. I persistently will have one meeting a week or a month with my people, and it will be on creativity, and I'm going to use a little left brain getting ready for it, but the environment's going to really encourage the right brain to come forth. And so Dom Perignon learned how to mix grapes from different years. He was the first to know how to squeeze. All juice of grapes is white. So you can make a white champagne out of a dark-skinned grape if you squeeze it the right way. You have to understand through a psychrometer what the sugar is. And so it took them a while to invent that. Spanish monks were coming through with corks in their water bottle. All of a sudden they stop the invention of the cork. So we never, well, only a little kid would say, I wonder how that cork was invented. Well, none of us do if the cork comes out of the bottle, but nobody's ever looked at that cork and said, I wonder how this came about. Well, it's a pretty interesting story. So now at the end of this, what I want to do is say, I want you to think of these 3 rules. I want you to take 2 minutes. Well, I want you to take 1 minute and write down something you're going to do differently to help you be more creative. And then in the 2nd minute, I want you to turn to someone you don't know and explain in 30 seconds or more, or like less than a minute, what you're going to do and which really hit you, that, here's something I can do, and I think I can see some results from it. Okay? So let's do that. Let's take, it's 5 to 12, so let's take no more than 3 minutes, and then I want to ask a few people what did you two, very quickly?
To me, I think it's to get out of a certain rigidity in terms of environment and dress and the way I present to the world, so that when I present, then I get feedback, and so it feeds back to me, and I can become more of whatever just by this circuit.
Okay.
And also have more fun.
Okay. That's good. Yes.
So I had to go to a funny movie and get a fitness ball and network with more entrepreneurs.
Okay. And remember, when you're networking, what can you do that's different? My favorite, by the way, Never Eat Alone.
Yeah.
Ken Ferrari.
Yeah.
He was at Deloitte Consulting when I did a lot of work with him. And that's the best networking book. You don't network when you need something. Start networking before you need something, and always be networking to say, what can I do for you?
So along that same vein, what I'm going to do is bring, because I'm a yoga instructor, so I'm going to bring release forms with me to the next entrepreneurial sessions. And I'm going to have folks fill out these release forms, because I have to as part of the insurance to do this.
Right.
And we're going to do about maybe 5 or 10 minutes of it.
Great. Okay. What about you? What's your first name?
Mike.
Mike.
So really it is around more of the exercise and instead of just, I do a lot of, because my team is scattered all over the country, I do a lot of stuff on the phone, looking at the computer, just getting up and walking around instead of doing that hour conference call, just staring at my computer.
Okay. Creating a play frame, one of the great things you can do, go to the cartoon bank, build up. I have now about 180 cartoons. It's cost me a lot of money. But it's 19 bucks. So you build up some cartoons, you're going to talk to the guy in Iowa, you know what kind of a sense of humor he has. He gets on his thing and the first thing that comes up is a cartoon and he laughs his butt off because you know his, all humor is based on grievance. Something didn't work and yet you can pull back and laugh with it, which means I can solve it. But you know he's a terrible putter, out goes this terrible putter cartoon and you both laugh and you've set the play frame over the phone.
No, that's great. That's a great piece of advice. The other thing is just, something I've really been working on is changing my mindset and continuing to reflect more things in a positive light instead of saying, how can't we do it, how can we do stuff, and continue building on that. And then I guess the third thing is really just, trying to get, I guess it comes back to the walking or I find myself the harder I try, the more stuck I become sometimes. So incorporating more movement,
exactly.
Maybe listening to some comedy or something like that. So working some different things.
Or Latin jazz. People talk about Mozart, and I love Bach double violin concerto is one of my favorites. But Latin jazz, I mean, you begin to walk, your brain waves change. Everything moves, and when you get that book, you'll find that. But the other one, happier.com, is Martin Seligman's new website. So you go there, take a test on optimism. You can take a bunch of free tests on there. And it's just so amazing to know, because we now know that negative beats optimism, and negative beats positive until it gets 3-to-1, positive over negative. A negative thought always beats a positive thought. A negative thought always beats 2 positive thoughts. A negative thought only gets defeated by when you get 3-to-1 on a consistent basis. And this is done by a guy named Lasota, who's a chaos mathematician, with Barbara Fredrickson in her book Positivity. So how do I create the positive mindset? It's not like I come in and say, you know, your shoes are great. Yeah, I love what they've done with your hair. Your face looks really good. Your work is shit. I mean, you know, 3-to-1, that's not the way it goes, right? The thing I love about creativity is you can say a few of those words and people say, oh, it's all right, it's a creativity class, you know? Anybody else have one other? Yeah.
I'm pretty good in the exercise department and the food department, but I would like to get up earlier and be outside right away, just even if it's 5 minutes in fresh air.
And that is, you know, when we were working with athletes, we had to help them understand circadian rhythm. My Latin again, circa dies, about the day. It's 24.5-hour rhythm, starts high in the morning. The sooner you get out and get sunlight, the pineal gland then floods you with dopamine and norp and all the kinds of the chemicals of greatness. So I think that's a great idea. Okay, now let's do rules 4, 5, and 6. Getting out of stuckness. And that's one of the things you said, change a little bit of rigidity to my mindset. And I call this, we're all trapped in the monkey trap. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, one of the great books of all time, Robert Pirsig, a great philosopher. And he's talking about gumption stops. Gumption is psychic gasoline. It means energy, a can-do, all this stuff. And he said we get caught in the monkey trap, which still to this day works in South India. They capture monkeys, which are very destructive little people, little animals, and they capture them by hollowing out coconuts, putting a very small hole so the monkey can put his hand in the coconut to reach for rice, which monkeys love. They smell it, they come out of the clearing, it's chained, the coconut is chained to a stake or a tree. They put their hand in, they make a fist with the rice, they can't get it out. And Pirsig says, just think of the natives are coming over the clearing casually and slowly. They know the monkey's not going to let go because the monkey can ask to himself, would I rather have freedom without rice or rice without freedom? What he calls value rigidity. Brilliant. And I have one of my new talks is on how you get out of the monkey trap and start on a winning streak, because we have some really good insights on how do I create a winning streak. And the first thing is you have to have a win. Yeah, it's like you're ready for everything until a win happens. Once the win happens, you bring all your stuff into existence. The win can be anything that happens to you, not that you caused. But this is so brilliant, and every time I think about this, and I was working for a company, can't remember who it was, 3M I think, they actually got little coconuts and little stakes, and you know, when they were doing the big time stuff, so all the sales came and they got a little coconut and a stake. And then the story. And of course, everyone says, we're always in a monkey trap. As McLuhan says, as soon as we break out one environment, we're in another environment. And we got to start. So it's like Apple Computer. I love Apple Computer. So they're not in the phone business. It's all the phones are saying, AT&T is saying, now who's going to be our thing? Who in the phone business is going to be our biggest competition? Apple's over here. And Apple says, hey, they're not doing very well with phones, so let's create the best ever. Or, you know, whatever. You see what I mean? But as soon as that's out, they've already got the next one online. You can't stop thinking creative. You can't say, oh, that was a great idea, now I can rest. You never can rest. And you love creativity so much that who'd want to rest? So that's so important to think, where is my rigidity today? What values am I letting overcome? General Motors was in the monkey trap. Nothing could convince them, even though Hummer made a little money, it was going against a lot of, going against a lot of what was out there. It wasn't making enough money. It was going against what we were thinking of as environment and all of this stuff, but they couldn't let it go. What monkey trap are you in right now? Even as you're sitting here, you're in a monkey trap. And it usually has to do with your strength. I think for a long time I got too businesslike. My strength is my creativity. And someone had to catch me up and say, as a matter of fact, this book, Catch Fire, which I said, I can't let myself get too carried away because this is a serious business book. And someone said to me, I like this, but it's nothing like you. But it did sell well, and we decided to go with it this way. And so, I'm happy. But analogies. Use analogies. You're stuck. What's the analogy you can think of? This is rule number 5, and it's just incredibly important to think about. We always use sports analogies, but there's others. Right now, jazz is a great analogy for what we're doing. There's got to be, it's like a theme and variations in classical music. There's got to be, you got to recognize a certain way they put 4 or 10 notes together. They play it enough so that you get the pattern in your brain. By the way, this is your brain on music, sets this up beautifully. But then off you go. And while somebody keeps a pattern going in the bass, for instance, that now it allows this guy on his trumpet to go anywhere he wants to go. My favorite to listen to for creativity and my favorite jazz record of all times is Sketches of Spain, Miles Davis. And it uses as its backdrop Concerto de Aranjuez by Rodrigo, which to me, you are in Spain when you listen to this. And it's all new and exotic and takes your brain out to the universe. So analogies are good. Another good book you'd love to read is called The Culture Code. This is a French guy, Rappaillet, and so he does a lot of work for Fortune 100 companies, and they use him on what is the presupposition behind the brand I'm going to give. Not the supposition, but the presupposition. So what am I thinking about my thinking before I make the brand? So usually, here's what you typically do. Those of you who've been in this kind of business, you get a focus group and you ask them questions. And I've done a lot of focus groups, and I was stupid because I asked the questions they told me to ask. And he said, he's an anthropologist, a cultural anthropologist. And he said, we're all asking left brain questions, which produce left brain answers, which branding has nothing to do with. Branding has to do with the feeling, and I won't say that's an overall statement, but I mean there's some demographics you got to take into consideration, but also what you want to do is get to the feeling. So Chrysler buys Jeep. So they call this guy in and they say, we've come out with a new Jeep and we don't know what to call it. And so here's our focus group studies that we spent 100 grand on, and they say that people want it to look more like a Range Rover. That they don't want the safety reasons. They don't want the canvas, and we like the square headlights and all this stuff. And he says to them, throw those away. First of all, I don't listen to what anyone says until I start asking the questions. So they say, okay, you've done some good things. So he goes off with his little group, and in a big room with an oriental carpeting, and they're having just the kind of thing I would do. But the third hour, he has them sitting on the floor talking about if they've what was their first idea of a car? What's their first remembrance? Well, my dad bought a car. I was 8 years of age, and I'd love to keep the windows down in the back because the first time they had power button windows and all this. And then he finally gets them up to, now if let's say you're in a Jeep, what's your picture of yourself? How do you feel in a Jeep? And one woman finally nailed it, and she said, my hair's flowing, I'm not on a road at all. I'm going up and down mountains. It's exhilarating. It's fun. And so at the end of that, he said, the culture code for Jeep is horse. We want the freedom. We want the free flowing. Our thoughts about Jeep is different than all other four-wheel drives. And we're going any place a horse can go in the mountains. And so, and therefore you have to you don't have to change a lot. You have to keep the canvas, and you make the headlights round like a horse's eyes. And they did it, and Jeep went through the roof. They just sold everything. Then they say, now in Paris, we're going to do the same thing. They called it what? What did they call the Jeep? Wrangler. So they said, okay, we're going to Paris. We're, take the Jeep Wrangler over there. He said, what? Don't you get it? The Parisians have a whole different concept of what a Jeep should be. So they sent him over there. After going through this with them, thinking back over, let's say, 50 years of Parisian history, maybe even longer, what do you think the Parisians thought about when they thought about Jeep? Huh? Or, you're on the line, but liberator. We came into Paris, General Patton and others, in Jeeps. We liberated the French, and they called it the Liberator. And sold went through the roof. So, I mean, when you're thinking about stuff, see, this to me is so exciting that, you can hardly wait to sit down and start thinking about more stuff. So, and this is, to me, a great analogy. Develop beginner's mind. Very quickly, Tom Sawyer, remember Aunt Polly and the fence? What was the situation? What happened? Anybody? You didn't.
He doesn't want to paint the fence.
And so what's he do?
Well, it's really, he's got to have the right touch.
How's he get his buddies to do it?
Paint a fence. He made it fun, like he wanted to do it.
He made it fun. So Mark Twain describes him, he's forlorn on Saturday morning, and he's embarrassed because his friends are going to walk by and kid him. So all of a sudden he's possessed of a new idea, and he picks up the roller or the paint, whatever you use then to whitewash the fence, whistling a happy tune, and guys are walking by and he says, go to your stupid games or whatever, I get to paint the fence. And so pretty soon they're giving him half-eaten sandwiches and quarters and bullfrogs, etc. And he sits there on his butt whistling away all day long while his friends paint the fence. And that's what we call beginner's mind. And it's little kids. It's like, right now, I do a lot of work with some of the students from Daniels College of Business, because even though they're not little kids, they're certainly beginner's minds compared to what I'm dealing with all the time. Bright, fun. I mean, we have to have a multi-generational stuff. And sometimes the best thing, I did one called The Office of the Future. It was raised money for the Denver Symphony. And they had 3 contractors, 3 designers, build out offices of what they considered to be the future. Took them 2 months, and then at the end of it, they were unveiled. And then people paid money to come and see these offices of the future. It was a very popular thing. And out of it, the guy that won the design was John Carney, who got immediately hired by Disney. Because you know what he did? He brought in his daughter's friends, 6th grade at Morey or wherever they went to school. And he said, now, what do you see as the problem with your parents, and what kind of an office would you design for them? Stress was number 1. He even took them out to see, one of their parents had an office at AT&T. And they came back, and then he had them sit around writing up and drawing pictures of what they saw there. And the number 1 word was boring. Number 2 was stress. And so they did this office with float to relax tanks and Japanese windows and everything that they thought their parents would need to have a fun office. And they won the award going away. Disney hired him soon after, and he left our fair city. But isn't that interesting? And so there's the beginner's mind. Those are things we don't think about enough. So now let's take the second speed ovading, speed plus innovation. And let's take these 3 rules: beginner's mind, create analogies. What was the third one? Unstuck. And let's say, what analogy, what can I do for myself? What one idea of that you've resonated with would really help me? Okay, let's take 3 minutes. What are you thinking?
Well, I want Lynn to tell you.
Okay.
She might need to keep it secret because it is so good.
Okay.
Chicken, okay. Lola has figured out how to not drive anymore. And so, and being from an IT background, it's like sometimes when you go for a problem to solve it, you always think you have to make a bigger technical solution. And so we didn't get to the very specific, but how to get smaller with it.
Mhm.
Well, yet, you know, it's
And
like the
sort of like
pendulum
less
swing when
complicated.
you've got a problem and it seems so big because you haven't given yourself, what do you call that, the time to think about
Mhm.
it. So you're acting out of that big problem.
Right.
So your solution is go way
Yeah.
over here. And then you end up coming way back over here because you forgot what the problems
Yeah.
were here. And it's like this huge pendulum swing.
So how do you make it?
So you go,
Yeah.
and there you know, you
Yeah.
solve the problem without making any huge thing and make it simpler. But actually, I was laughing so much at her when she came up with it.
Oh,
But I don't know if she wants to tell.
oh, I'll tell you.
What?
I've been dealing with being stuck for a while due to some like health problems
Mhm.
and things. And so, but as I'm coming back into doing humor with groups of people, I'm thinking about the problem of like, you know, we talk about being constipated, and if you've been that in like the emotional realm, and so having a little kit when I come in of laughatives instead of
Oh.
laugh.
That's good.
And so, you know, like, I'm not sure what's in it yet, maybe a kazoo and a balloon, a little car,
Right.
a couple directions of things to do, but it's something like that to just to.
Excellent.
people, yeah.
Very good. Very nice. Alex.
Well, it's the, I'm usually fairly good at the analogy part, so that's not a
Mhm.
challenge. The monkey trap is something that resonated with me, and it's very easy getting stuck in a trap. So I told Mike that one of the monkey traps is, I was never much of a material guy, and I still am not, but I begin to appreciate certain things recently. So I begin the onset of a slippery slope. However, the part that I'm struggling with is time pressure. At work, I mean, I read thousands of pages of documents,
Mhm.
and meetings, and phone calls, and all that stuff. And as you said, I mean, innovation cannot be forced, it takes time. So I'm struggling for carving out, pulling out that time to really reflect, analyze, think, have fun,
Great.
do the exercise, those kinds of things.
3M built into its environment, you know, 20% of your time can be spent on anything you want. And if you come up with something and you go to 3M, and that was after they turned down the Post-it notes for 5 years. I kept coming up, hey, I got these Post-it, it'll never work, you know. 5 years that took them to take their largest producing element ever. But because of that, somebody was smart enough to say, we got to give these people time. I mean, all this creativity resides in our company, and we're not giving people time to express it. If you go then back through 3M, then they give you make an agreement on how you spend the money and how you get the money out of the product. As an entrepreneur, one of the things you can do and have the ability to do, is almost mandated to do, is not fight in the red ocean. The ocean is red with the blood of your competitors, you and them fighting each other. To create your own ocean where there are no competitors, you render competition irrelevant. So in the red ocean strategy, I'm competing in an existing marketplace. There's nothing that you're doing right now thinking about that you're competing with anyone for. You're creating a niche. Beat the competition, that's what you have to do. Exploit existing demand. Make the value cost trade-off. If I'm going to give you more value, I'm sorry, it's got to cost more. Beat that trade-off. And strategic choice, differentiation, or low cost. That's the red ocean. And so what they found in the creation of Cirque du Soleil, that they chose the blue ocean strategy, create an uncontested market space. Number one, make the competition irrelevant. Break the value cost trade-off. And here's what they did with the blue ocean strategy. Cirque du Soleil, French Canadian, said the circus, it's too tough and you don't make any money. So what's the number one thing that I can cut to cut costs? Animals. Not only that, but people are complaining and be nice to animals people, and all that stuff. And they eat while you sleep. And nothing works that eats while you sleep. So that was number one, get rid of the animals. Number two, what'd they get rid of?
The tent.
They got rid of the tent. The travel tent. they got rid of the circus stars. And the guy said, whoever heard of Mildred the flying trapeze artist anyway? Why am I paying her 100 grand? Nobody comes to see her. They come to a circus. Fourth thing they got it was 3 rings. That takes a lot more people to operate 3 rings. Nobody can see 3 rings because you can't multitask. So you could rapidly go, no. But the point is, they got rid of all those things. They kept the clowns, made them different. They themed the music. They wrote the stage play like a New York stage play. They got rid of their costs and they raised the prices. Now, wouldn't you call that a pretty exciting idea? Because they went into the blue ocean, they created their own thing. I thought that was just a really incredible thing. I learned from this guy to think backwards. Anybody recognize him? Okay, just think if you could brand yourself like this. I mean, you even hear kids that never saw anything he did and they'll come up with this. How does that work? How does that little brand work? How do you think backwards? He created a television thing where he had the ending in mind. He had a wife bludgeoning her husband to death, and he, just for comic sake, it was with a frozen leg of lamb. And when the inspector came over, it was very suspicious. He knew something was wrong. She invited him for lamb dinner, and they ate the evidence together. And he said, I came up with that ending, and then I thought back, and then that's the way I did my movies from then on. He also knew we read film. You know, we learned to read the paper right to left down the page. And so when you bring in strong characters in film, if you bring them left to right and up the stage, it jars you psychologically, but you're not knowing that. He can use that to startle you. And so, you know, just so you're thinking backwards in a very pristine way. Who is it that wrote 7 Habits? He talks about it as start with the end in mind. And it's a little too preachy for me, but I think thinking backwards sometimes, we worked with Duracell, and they thought backwards from you're at the line paying for your batteries, what's your emotional set? You don't go for batteries usually unless a battery failed while you were trying to do something. And so you're pissed to begin with. So when you go, you tend to buy less batteries. Does that make sense to you? At least that's what they came up with. And so they said, okay, we've got to make buying batteries fun. That's why you get Duracell testers, and you get extra, if you buy these, you get an extra couple thrown in, because they wanted to make the experience fun for you to go against what they knew you were thinking anyway. And I'm ending up very quickly on these, but McDonald's, and all these are in your handouts, by the way. McDonald's says focus on the tools. McLuhan had it a different way. He said all tools and inventions are extensions of either our physical selves or our central nervous system. So the car is the extension of the foot. But he says what's interesting is what we extend, we tend to cut off. So we extend the foot into the car, we stop walking. So we become a nation of overweight people. But he said what's really interesting is that what you cut off always comes back as an art form. Nike. Nike decorated the very things we lost by starting with from shoes to run. Used to be, when you and I grew up, we'd buy a pair of sneakers and cut off a pair of jeans and run down the street. And now you pay Armani and Nike to decorate, to make artistic forms out of that which was cut off. The radio had to reinvent itself when TV came along. That's another thing he said. I want to figure out about newspapers. He said all new media don't kill old media, they recreate it. And so the newspapers, as everyone's afraid they're going to be out of business, if they follow what he calls the tetrads, if they follow that, what will the newspapers be? So instead of people walking around bemoaning newspapers, they should be saying, hey, what are we going to be? And if we're the first to really figure it out, we're going to be top of the line.
Do you think there's anything to, you know, you're talking about the clothes and the shoes. There's anything to the uniform that it's bringing a uniform to the...
I think what's bringing the uniform back, like a lot of schools are now going back to uniforms is because it used to be everything was uniform. So we wanted to get away from uniforms to go to school and open it up a little bit. Now everything's all over the place. So we want a little structure in our lives. So we go back to uniform. Environments, creative environments for meetings. And we're going to end up with this, but this is so important. Number one, have meetings. Get left brain and green about having meetings. They go into your calendar, even when you say, we're so busy, how can we take time out? Just what your point is. How can we take time out to do a creativity meeting when I got to get all the stuff out the door? That's the end. That's the start of your death. And they take precedent first. Like vacation should be planned at the beginning. Even having fun vacations, there's a lot of people that say, yeah, every year I get my week off, we got to go back and see the relatives. Bullshit! I mean, you're killing yourself. You got to find out a different way to see the relatives, but you need a vacation to reignite and innovate yourself. And so that's the thinking. Just think of the monkey trap that the person that says that every year is in. The relative monkey trap. And so I'm saying if we're going to get creative, we have to do this and environmentalize our meetings. Friend of mine who worked with General Electric was the first guy to come up with this idea. When he filmed and photographed a bunch of his friends' headquarters where they had their offices. And how do you create your office? Your own design, every day, your own environment. Is that a hindquarters? That is, you sit on a place that invites you to sit on your butt. Or is it a headquarters? Does your office invite you to get ideas and move them out into the universe? So do you have a sit-down or a stand-up desk? Do you have a phone that you put here, or do you have a really good phone that people can really hear clearly? I mean, I know people that have said for years, this phone has never worked and I don't think it'll ever be very clear. And I'll say, well, it's like having a broken arm and saying, well, I hope someday it starts working again. So how do you recreate? What kind of colors do you have? Do you have something that says, do you have a fit ball in front of your computer? How is your headquarters? And that's something very interesting. So all these, as Woody Allen said, 80% of life is in showing up. How light, bright, cheery, fun is your headquarters. Now, if you're more left brain, you'll want it cleaner and you'll file things. If you're more right brain, you file by pile. But that's all right. The thing is, find something that's exciting that puts you a little bit more edgy. The right brainers will get more edgy. The left brainers, it's just saying wherever I am, I just want to get a little bit more to get me more creative. And risk and persist, and that's what we'll end with. Well, I've really enjoyed this today, and I hope, I hope you take this seriously in a very fun way, and go home and write out a little fun plan for yourself. Don't do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do more of a brain dump kind of thing. But to see if you can make 1 or 2 things, that's all you have to do, that you put in your life on a consistent basis. So, thanks. Hope you got something out of it.